here we are with Juan Francisco. Very, very happy that you take the time and be here with us. Before we get into content, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Okay. Thank you for having me here. At the moment of recording this video, I'm in Berlin, but I'm not originally from Europe. I'm originally from Argentina, so Latin America. And I'm Changemaker Exchange's program lead for democratic renewal. Changemaker Exchange is a global community of 1,200 members, and we focus quite a lot on social impact and climate change innovation and supporting a global community of young change makers based worldwide. Changemakers for Democracy is the program that got me into the organization, and I'm currently leading it, and it's a program focused on democratic renewal and economic systems change for Europe, now originally looking to expand to other regions as well. And it's aimed at 15 change makers based in Europe without an age limitation. So happy for you to check CXC's website and Changemakers for Democracy also particularly.
Thank you. Everybody can be a change maker independently of age. Can you share a bit more in terms of how the program emerged? I know ChangemakerXChange had a different focus before on the summits, and then you started to also introduce cohort-based programs such as Changemakers for Democracy. So can you share a bit more of the reasoning there and also how specifically that program, Changemakers for Democracy, emerged?
So the whole point of the organization is to empower change makers, as we name them, worldwide. And in order to do so, we firstly, over 10 years ago, started delivering these summit-like retreats for them to connect on a deeper level. So not like light networking, but rather deep connections, and also reconnecting them to what made them change makers in the first place. This idea kept evolving, and after the pandemic, we decided to go forward and focus on thematic cohorts, thinking that this connection could also be greatly improved if the change makers that shared a common language or a common theme. We started with Change Makers for the Planet, and we run this program in a lot of regions: North America, Latin America, Europe, MENA, Sub-Saharan Africa. And we also started this newer iteration of the program of a thematic program called Changemakers for Democracy, centered around this specific challenge, also focusing on connecting them on a deeper level, because we added, besides the summit, which is like our regular staple kind of activity, we've also added a series of programmatic elements alongside it, with a capacity building program and collaboration projects that they can submit and get funding for. Also, Changemakers for Democracy marks a bit of a difference to our usual program, in the sense that we did give them funds for them to execute the initiatives. So each of them got an unrestricted grant to work on what they were currently doing. And they also got a restricted, smaller stipend for them to work on capacity building. So the full process behind us departing from that, everyone's a change maker, to let's focus more on specific change making themes, was around helping them connect on a deeper level.
Yeah. And I can tell more from the outside, and one of my co-founders attended one of your summits, that this is something extremely valuable to change makers, which sometimes can also be a quite lonely occupation or effort. So it's really crucial work. And we will link all what you are doing also in the show notes. Now, coming to Changemakers for Democracy. So can you share a bit more? So I understand you also partnered up. You're re-granting a substantial amount of money, so receiving it from somebody else and then providing it to the change makers. There's capacity development, and it's also a very sensitive and complex topic, renewing democracy, especially in the given times. In this, can you share why you have chosen to go with a regenerative approach to impact evaluation and also the impact garden model?
I think the main point there is that traditional measuring, both qualitative and quantitative techniques, usually don't get a full scope of what our programs are, given that they're kind of very complex to measure. For example, if we wanted to go with a very thorough measuring of what we're doing now, we should also have outputs and outcomes for what our change makers are doing with the actual money. So it involves like an extra layer. And they're also, as I mentioned before, having collaborative projects that they also got extra funded as part of being in ChangemakexXChange program. So our main problem that we wanted to tackle is how to have an approach that can be thorough, that can be systemic, and that can also be scalable. Thinking of not only Changemakers for Democracy as the main program we are applying this to, but also our full theory of change and our other programs, because, you know, these people are going to interact when they enter the community with the other community members. So even though they all share a common basis of a summit and some elements that are common throughout all of our cohorts, some of the other elements are not. And it's also important for us to measure which things are working, which things are not, where do we need to make changes, where things could be different and improve. Because this is also a very beta state-like project. It's a lot of trial and error, and we also want to reduce that. It's very complex, so we also wanted to understand when it comes to them, for example, collaborating, what makes them collaborate more? Is it the extra funding that they can allocate to it? Is it the fact that they can already commit funds, the unrestricted funds, for example, for salaries, and don't need to fundraise, so they have a little bit more extra time to collaborate with peers? Is it the summit that helps them start to get to know each other because they don't really knew each other from before our program? Is the fact that they lack a wider ecosystem, and so we have an extra programmatic element, which is an ecosystem day. So identifying those nooks and crannies is very important to us, because we hope to replicate this model. We hope to also do a great report on it, and also try to understand how funding for democracy could look like for other philanthropic initiatives. And we also wanted to scale it. This is more on an organizational level to our other programmatic elements, as well as our other activities, which are not necessarily cohorts or this kind of change makers for XXX topic.
Yeah, thank you. And I also like the words that you've chosen. So systematic, scalable, and also thorough. And I think this is something, just to as a note there, this whole topic of unrestricted funding and also approaching philanthropy in a trust-based way, I think is a huge issue. And then the question, what's the role that impact evaluation plays? And you highlighted a lot this wish of learning internally, of understanding how things interrelate, and also what actually truly empowers and enables people. And I think also this is something, a role that impact evaluation can play in the impact garden model.
I might add something to it.
Please.
Given that the model is shaped like a tree, in this case, we are watching the tree grow as the program is unfolding. So that's also something that, at least visually to us, is appealing and helps us understand the whole program and give it in its logic. Try to understand it, when it's the time to water the roots, when the tree will grow, when there will be fruits, and what are those inputs, those outputs, and try to understand it as a whole.
Yeah, happy to hear that. And actually, do you want to share a bit more? Because we are, I would say, maybe not exactly halfway through, but we have worked already for a couple of months. We have developed an impact garden for your program. You started at least already with measurement. So just if you want to give us some insights in how concretely you applied it, and maybe some learnings that you've already had.
Yep. So we started working a little bit with theory of change. We already had a theory of change in place. And this is obviously an organizational wide theory of change, and it not only applies to Changemakers for Democracy, so also adapting it to the specific program, because the program didn't necessarily have one. We did have a series of outputs and outcomes before, but we wanted to make sense of them as a whole theory, conceptualize them. And to do that, we started mapping out what we identified as change-making capacities. So, for example, what is empathy and how can we measure it in a survey? Or what is collaboration, or what is well-being, and how those questions can be asked in a way that makes sense and that also makes sense in the different programmatic touch points we had throughout the program. So we didn't want them answering questions all the time. We wanted to identify what was the best moment to measure what. And to do so, we mapped these touch points. For example, they have an application phase where they submit their initial proposals to be selected for the fellowship. Then they get an interview. Those who get shortlisted get an interview where we gather a bit more information and we understand these change makers a bit more. Then we went to a confirmation form once they get selected officially. That confirmation form had some questions. We then went to a personal assessment to develop the capacity building, which was linked to these change maker capacities. And this self-assessment happened through a Zoom call, so it changed. It wasn't a form anymore. It happened on at least digitally face-to-face, but a face-to-face in the end, and a synchronous activity as well. Our summit as well had some forms before and after for them to fill. And we also, before we started delivering the activities, we mapped these capacities through another form that we will end up closing that circle once the fellowship ends. So it was really valuable for us, not for it to feel like they had to fill 1,000 forms, rather for it to be very intentional, and for us to also understand what information matters when, and what information can we gather with another methodology that's not necessarily a Google form. So, example, being in the summit allowed for more face-to-face interaction that provided a different kind of feedback on where they were, more qualitative feedback that you need to take notes somehow. And we had another in-person event with the Ecosystem Day, so you could see an evolution, not only individually, but cohort-wide, and those things were mapped out. And this is where we're at right now. We're currently looking to scale it for our other programs. This is where we're currently at.
Well, exciting. Yeah. And we'll get there in a second. So just here also a side note, there is in the module on participatory data collection, also meaningful indicators. But what you're talking about specifically is you having a coherent image or understanding, your theory of change, that defines relevant capacities, etc. And then also to be very intentional where and how to gather data. And from what I hear, data collection in that case, if it's done, if it's integrated, if it happens synchronously, is a relational activity. It's not an extractive activity. At least that's the ambition.
Absolutely.
Then let's talk about the scaling, because this is something that I'm really excited about, because I think we worked for a couple of months, and then you told me that you've decided to roll out the Impact Garden to other programs. And what I specifically like is that you independently made that decision, and you are doing it. And can you tell us a bit more about this process, the internal decision, and how you go about it?
Yes, I think it comes back to what I said before. We need a comprehensive way to measure that makes sense on organizational level. That's not just program dedicated, because we also want to contrast it with other programs. So, for example, we ran 2 cohorts. Each of them has differences. Why does one get to certain outcomes better than the other? And it's not something that's necessarily logical. As for example, this one had more money committed to it, so it performed better than the other. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's the capacity building was run different, or the summits were run different, or programmatic elements were shifted in time. So they got to the summit and they didn't know each other, and when this other element happened, it didn't made a lot of sense. Obviously, this for us makes quite a lot of sense, since we are trying to quite state of the art when it comes to what we do. So we're currently innovating quite a lot and trying to create new paths on what this sort of community weaving, also philanthropic activities could look like. It's not necessarily what usually happens. I'd say it's quite the opposite. And so we're trying for new ways on how to drive this social impact support forward, and not just keep it to ourselves. And this, as I mentioned before, not only runs for our different programs, but we obviously want to contrast them and see what works best and why it works and when it works, etc. It also runs through our different, what we call pillars. So our cohorts are just what we say pillar 1, which is on a more micro level. We have on a more middle level how we interact also with the ecosystem, how we deliver this sort of activities through facilitation with other organizations that works with changemakers themselves. And we also have a third pillar where we run a global program called the Possibilists. And some of the questions in the Possibilists are being influenced by the different capacities that we measured for Changemakers for Democracy, because we feel like they can be a bit more representative or a bit more accurate, especially when you just have a statement to ask. So the Possibilists, just to give some context, it's a global report on change making. And a lot of organizations worldwide take part in it and share it with their own communities. And it's a way to map where's well-being, what's the level of well-being in change makers, what's their level of happiness. And you come to some awesome conclusions. For example, change makers, even though they face a lot of challenges that we have mapped out in the study, perceive themselves as happier than most countries would in the happiness index. And yeah, having that systematic approach through our different elements and through our different programs and activities, I think it's necessary. And I don't think this regenerative approach is the end game. It's just a baseline to get started and to a deeper way of measuring and a deeper way of understanding how each person, each element, each initiative works within a wider theory of change.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good to hear. So the different pillars where you apply it. And also to your last point, I would also say impact evaluation is a means. It's never an end in itself. And one of the means is actually that it supports that self-reflection, understanding of one's own impact in the wider ecosystem, and also understanding like leverage points as well. And I can only recommend reading the Possibilists. So it's our go-to study when it comes about change making on a global scale.
You can obviously check it, and by the time this video comes out, you may have a new study on your screen as well.
We are quick in uploading, but nonetheless, by the time you watch it, sure, there might be a new study. It will all be linked. Well, thank you. Then one last question. What's ahead for you? What's something that you are excited about on your horizon?
I think what I'm excited about is the different possibilities when it comes to obviously change making. I think there's quite a lot to do. It's not an area where you feel like everything has been done. And when it comes to supporting change makers, I feel like it's very important to understand what to prioritize, because we are, even though we seem like we are a huge organization, we are not. We are just a 10-person core team. We really rely heavily on our community, helping us out with lots of the different activities we deliver. But prioritizing demands understanding well what the situation is. We are currently looking at impact evaluation on a deeper form, and this is not to encourage you to continue with this course or anything like that, but we are actually trying to make sense on it on a more organizational level through our different elements. So this is something that is currently always on our mind, and we want to finally hit the nail on the head on that one and say, yes, okay, so we have a common language across our different program managers. All of our core team members know what's happening, how should we look at different things, when do we know something's working, when do we know something is not, and just generally take it out of our forever to-do list in order to actually focus quite a lot on what's coming next and what's needed. And as you said, Jannik, have it as a means and have it as something always contributing to what we do, and not something rather that you say, oh no, we need to report on this, funds, how do we do it? Okay, let's figure it out. Rather something that's actually actively on our side, helping us drive change forward.
Well, that makes my heart sing, because that's for me also the essence of the impact garden and the regenerative approach. It gives more energy than it takes. And while listening, I also had this image. ChangemakerXChange is a global community. It's an ecosystem. And one hope I have is that the impact garden can be applied across scales. So there can be an impact garden for a specific program. So that's an ecosystem within the wider ecosystem of ChangemakerXChange, and to perceive it in that way. And also that everybody who comes in touch with you and with your ecosystem, I'm sure will learn something within, maybe also outside, and tools and skills that they can then carry and take into their ecosystems or wherever they go, and to also understand the impact that you already have, and which I think is quite substantial. So can only say, check out ChangemakerXChange's work, Changemakers for Democracy, the Possibilists, everything else. And big thank you, Juan Francisco, for being with us.
Thank you, and wish you all watching this video good luck on the course.
I hope so.